Good morning and a warm welcome to this webinar on going beyond individual company action for systems decarbonization. This meeting is part of our virtual event series at the WBCSD, and we're very pleased to discuss with you today the challenges and also opportunities in one system, the built environment, but also how we can draw lessons for the decarbonization of other.
Okay.
My name is Roland Hunziker and I'll be your host for today. I'm the Director for Sustainable Buildings and Cities at the WBCSD. For those of you who may not be familiar with WBCSD, just very briefly, we are a global member-led business association with 200 members, and our mission is to provide business leadership for a sustainable future. Here you can see the logos of our 200 member companies, and we divide our strategic focus into 6 programs: circular economy, climate and energy, cities and mobility, food and nature, people, as well as redefining value. Today's focus will be part of our cities and mobility program on the issues around decarbonization in the built environment. I would like to start with a few housekeeping issues. First of all, this meeting is being recorded, so when you join, you'll be asked to accept so you can continue participating. All participants are muted. However, you are able to participate actively in the session by using the chat function. We encourage you to use the chat if you have questions you would like to ask the panelists, and you're also able to raise your hand and then we can unmute you and give you the floor. In WBCSD, we operate with a strict antitrust policy, and so these are the rules we have in all our meetings, be they physical as well as online, to avoid any discussion on the items listed on this list. So we'd now like to start with 2 questions that will show up in the poll that I'll bring up now. I just need to relaunch it. Here we go. First question. This is what we'd like to hear in all our virtual events, is how did you hear about this event? And the second question is, which part of the built environment system do you represent? You're part of a materials company, real estate, design. If you feel you are not part of the built environment system, that you think you are in a different sector, you may click others. We just remind you that in any case, you're an occupier and user of a building. So we hope that this session is still very relevant as well. So we'll just give this a little bit more time. For those who are just joining, we are displaying a short polling question. How did you hear about this event and which part of the built environment system do you represent? There's quite a number of others, which is interesting because definitely the learnings we hope to have today are not just applicable. Indeed, we are going to discuss how this applies across different systems. I'll give it 20 more seconds for a few more people to answer. Okay, so I will close the poll and then the results should show up on your screen. Share results. How did you hear about this event? Interesting, personalized emails are still the most effective. It's good to know, we're learning from that. Website, partners, very important. And then, which part do you represent? I think very interesting that we have quite a number of you who are not part of the built environment, meaning not a material manufacturer or designer or real estate, but just to remind ourselves, we are all obviously users of buildings, and hence we have an importance here. But also this webinar is not just about the built environment. It is really how can we also apply the learnings of today to some of the other systems. Good, I will stop this now. The program for today, I'll just give a brief introduction, and then we will move into our first panel, of which I will introduce the panelists shortly, around the challenges. We will then go into a short introduction of the building system carbon framework that we have been working on together with the companies here at the WBCSD that provides a common language for all companies in the built environment, how we can jointly drive decarbonization. Then we'll go into a second panel discussion around the opportunities. And lastly, we want to take the discussion and the learning to other systems. As part of our SOS 1.5 program, we are helping companies in all different sectors how they can implement their journey towards 1.5. If we look at commitments that have been taken by companies, the Science Based Targets Initiative, as of this morning, has counted 915 commitments from companies, of which close to 400 are approved. And a bit over 250 companies have signed up to business ambition for 1.5. And they represent $3.6 trillion market capitalization. Women Business Coalition look at wider commitments that include also RE100, EP100, EV100, and there's over 1,800 companies committed. So we could ask ourselves, what more do we need to do? If there is a commitment from such a large range of companies representing significant turnover in different sectors, the job is half done. Now, what we see is as these companies are moving from ambition to action, it is really critical how we all work upstream with our suppliers, but also downstream with the clients to achieve and accelerate these commitments. And we also see how companies are engaging in positive advocacy to engage regulators, policymakers, to show what is possible, provide evidence, and help them with more ambitious supporting policy. Women in Business have coined the term of the ambition loop. So more ambitious businesses leading also to more ambitious policy making. Now, the main challenge we see across systems is how do companies deal with their scope 3 emissions? For some companies, this can make up more than 90% of their overall emissions. And what will be particularly interesting is to look how do we use the influence of certain players that they have over the whole system? So speaking of the built environment, one example are investors who are investing in real estate assets. What is the importance of embodied CO2 from the materials to build those buildings in the CO2 emissions of an investor? Or similarly, for an architect, what is the importance of CO2 emissions in the projects that architects are developing? So these are some of the challenges we'd like to look into. And we do this in the built environment, which represents 40% of global emissions in total, if we look at full life cycle emissions, including those from materials, as well as the energy use in the building operation. We will hear about the challenges of different companies in the built environment value chain, and we will introduce this building system carbon framework so that we all can discuss the need for such a common language. The most important for today, what we'd like to get out is to highlight the importance of collaboration and not to shift responsibility from one to the other, but so that we are able to accelerate individual action and make sure that the whole system decarbonizes, not just its individual parts, but all of the system. So with that, I would like to briefly introduce our excellent panelists. This is in alphabetical order. So we're pleased to have Alberto Carrillo Pineda, who is the Director for Science-Based Targets at CDP, Emmanuel Normand, Vice President for Sustainable Development at Saint-Gobain, Erwan Sauter, Director for Climate and Energy at WBCSD, Franz Besnik, R&D Director, Global Head of Sustainable Innovation at Procter & Gamble, Gladys So, Manager Sustainability at K11 Concepts Limited, which is part of the New World Development Group, Joe De Silva, Global Sustainable Development Leader at Arup, who will be our moderator of the next two panels, Lena Höck, Senior Vice President Sustainability at the Skanska Group, Luca De Giovanetti, my colleague in the Built Environment team focusing on science-based targets, and last but not least, Sébastien Soleil, Head of Energy Transition and Environment at BNP Paribas. I'm very, very pleased to have you all with us, and I will now hand over to Joe for our first panel on the challenges. Joe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. It's a pleasure to be here today talking about this, which is an incredibly important subject. I started out life as an engineer designing the built environment, and it's interesting that 10, 15 years ago, the focus was not on the building structure, but on the building operations. That, of course, has changed significantly, and we're now thinking about how can we reduce emissions, not just in terms of the operation of buildings, but in terms of their construction itself. At Arup, we've done our science-based target and signed up to an ambitious 30% reduction in scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions associated with our operations over 5 years. But we're a consulting company, so our scope 3 emissions are largely about business travel, which COVID has helped enormously with. But we realized that our emissions are absolutely trivial compared to the impact of the buildings and the infrastructure we design over their lifespan. And the key question for us is how can we make sure that the buildings we design and the advice we contribute to accelerates rapid decarbonization. As designers, we can come up with innovative ideas informed by whole life costing and analysis, but putting these ideas into practice is something else entirely. What we've learned is that a key challenge is simply the number and diversity of organizations involved in financing, planning, designing, constructing, operating, and maintaining a building. Therefore, I'm delighted to say that the panel that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development have put together today crosses all of those roles in the built environment. And I'm delighted to speak to Emmanuel, Lena, Gladys, and Sebastian. And thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to start with Gladys, if I may, who is from New World, which is a major Hong Kong developer. And I'm interested in what do you feel your role is as a developer in decarbonizing the built environment? What is New World doing already, and what is preventing you doing more? I know that New World are very focused on making a difference on this agenda. Gladys.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Joe. I think that as a real estate, we have a very big responsibility of setting the demand for all the architects or constructions on to design close to world's net zero carbon buildings. For now, we are very committed on having a sustainable vision, and we have already committed to reduce our carbon.
Lena, you're cutting out. Perhaps you could go a bit closer to the mic. I think we might have lost Gladys temporarily. So maybe I could go to Lena.
Expertise on decarbonization as well as having energy efficient building that as practical as possible. So having a new we have done a lot of green loans and green bonds to help that on the financial side. But we see we do need a lot more engagement from our tenants or our clients and renting the buildings to have other demand on having more energy efficient together, especially for the scope 3 that Rowan has talked about.
Okay, so you're wanting to go right from your tenants at one end of the value chain, right the way through to the finances at the other. Sebastian, could I maybe bring you in here from Saint-Gobain? How do you feel that the finance industry has a role to play in driving change in the built environment? And what are the key challenges from your perspective?
Thank you, Joe. Yes, so I'm from BNP Paribas, not Saint-Gobain. Saint-Gobain, it's Emmanuel. So yes, as a group, as a financial institution, we have quite many roles in this field. First of all, the most obvious thing, maybe, we deal a lot with individuals who have dwellings, we have houses who live in flats, and we may have the decision to take whether they want to renovate their dwelling or not. Do they want to make their home more energy efficient or not? And it's quite a big decision. So in this field, we have two main roles as a bank. The first one is raising awareness. So many clients of ours go to our banking counselors and discuss about what they want to do with their dwelling. And our banking counselor should be there to advise them on this kind of decisions. Is it relevant? How can they finance this kind of works? So they can finance this kind of works with, at first, their own money, but there are in many countries, especially in France, in Europe, but in many other countries, public authorities provide with a lot of loans, with a lot of grants to help people finance this kind of works for more energy efficient homes. And we can advise them as well on, yes, what kind of works are the most relevant with what kind of companies and this kind of things. So first role of our banking counselor is raise awareness and advise our individual clients on the energy efficiency in buildings. Second role, obviously, is if they decide to make the work, if they decide to spend money on getting their home more energy efficient, which we are here to provide them with credits, with loans. In BNP Paribas, for instance, we developed in France as well. It's very country specific, to be honest. But in France, we have developed a new loan, energy bio 1% and 0%. So with a very long maturity, up to 15 years, and with very low rate, 1% or 0%. So it's a credit to finance works in dwellings to increase the energy efficiency. So it's for the banking part of the BNP Paribas, two main roles, advisory, raising awareness, first role, and second role, providing credit. And there is another thing which has already been discussed by Roland, for instance. We are investors as well. We have a subsidiary, BNP Paribas Asset Management, which is dealing with managing assets. On this point, I must say that what is very important is to get good KPIs, good diagnosis, because as an investor, when we invest in green assets, in green buildings, in energy efficient buildings, we need clear KPIs to be sure that these green buildings are really green. So we must be able to show to the financial institutions that trust us in managing their money. We must show them that, okay, this building is really green. If we want to aggregate credits for more energy efficient buildings, we have to show them that, okay, before the works, the houses were not very energy efficient, and after the works, they were very energy efficient. So we need reliable data on energy efficiency. And then we have,
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'm just going to interrupt you there because we're just very short of time, and I was keen to hear from Lena and Emmanuel also. Lena, you're from Skanska, which has been leading the way in reducing carbon in the built environment. What are the biggest challenges that you see that's preventing you doing even more than you're doing already?
Well, thank you so much for having me here, and also keen to listening to this dialogue that I've already started. Skanska is one of the major construction and development companies. We have about 10,000 projects ongoing. And tapping into what Gladys and Sebastian is saying, it is about, of course, technical issues when it comes to decarbonization, but also about knowing how to measure the impact and the performance of the different net zero solutions or low carbon solutions. So getting your measurements straight and doing that at an early stage, already in the design phase, that's when you actually are able to impact the carbon footprint for real. How you design the materials you choose. I can give you one example. One of our highest priced divestments, a building in Boston, which we divested for 4 billion Swedish crowns last year, actually had the highest performance on LEED Platinum. And the reason why it was so acknowledged by investors and also the buyer was both, of course, a great building, but also a great future-proof performance, where it was efficient and also taking into account already in the design phase how we actually designed the building being a rounded shape. We could reduce both cladding as well as the future energy needed for the building's operations due to the rounded form, not needing as much cooling due to less sun exposure. So just by doing a design that is different, bold and nice, of course, really nice to have such a design, but we could actually reduce the carbon footprint. And I would also like to tap into what Sebastian was saying regarding finance, because I think that is key, and it's also tapping into the challenges. Skanska has a very high ambition when it comes to our role in decarbonization. We have set a goal on net zero emissions by 2045, including all of our value chain. Our own emissions, the past 5 years, we have decreased with 28%. But in order to make this happen, we have to make sure that in our productions and also the whole value chain appreciates being a part of this journey. And their finance come in being really important. So we also need ourselves as a company to set out the levels you're able to perform at when it comes to the sustainability performance. So what we're doing with our own development project, we have set quite a high standard for sustainability, where about 90% of last year's divestment within our commercial buildings actually had the highest levels of sustainability certifications. And that is, for example, LEED Gold or Platinum, BREEAM Excellent, etc. But this also means is for us also being able to show KPIs of performance to the clients and also to the investors. And just like Sebastian said, he is searching for KPIs. He wants to know the sustainability, performance, and impact. And what Skanska has done was actually setting up a framework for green funding. So we did our first green bond, 2014. We now have a green bond committee, which I am the chair of, but the head of treasury, the head of development operations are part of the committee. And we are making sure that we have a good opportunities to take care of green financial opportunities. So what we have done now is actually to make sure that all of our external funding should be green. And now we actually have reached the level that 100% of our external fundings for our own development project are actually green funded from both our own green bond, but also other green investors. And what they demand is, just like Sebastian is saying, they demand KPIs and measurements regarding the performance, because we actually do get favorable conditions when it comes to perform at a high sustainability level. When we can show the KPIs of the performance, then we can also have it green funded, and thus having a more favorable funding of our external processes. So when talking about challenges, how do we make this happen and make our clients also within construction set forth on this journey that we ourselves has proven to be quite successful, both when it comes to transforming our business for sustainability, but also to make and crack the business case to show the value for clients as well as to the investors. So the greatest challenge we have is how can we help our partners and our clients to embark the same journey.
Thank you very much, Lena. And finally, last but certainly not least, Emmanuel. I mentioned at the beginning that one of the big challenges we have now is it's not just about operational energy, it's recognition that the embodied energy locked up in the materials that companies like yours supply is such a big issue. Could you tell us what you see as the biggest challenges in changing the performance of the built environment overall and moving rapidly to decarbonization, particularly in terms of embodied energy?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the invitation. Saint-Gobain, as a manufacturer of building materials mainly, is contributing to the decarbonization of the built environment in three main ways. The first one is providing solutions for more energy efficiency in the buildings. The second way is to, as we are developing what we call lightweight solutions, do solutions, for example, combining insulation and plasterboards, can replace heavy materials as concrete in a number of places where concrete can be replaced, and as such reduce the embodied carbon in the building. And the third contribution of Saint-Gobain is to reduce our own impact by reducing our own carbon footprint that is then reflected in the life cycle analysis of the product that are being sold to our customers. And for that third contribution, Saint-Gobain has committed itself to be carbon neutral on scope 1, 2, and 3 by 2050. So what is the challenge that we have? It's somehow on one side to make all that contribution visible. When we are looking at our own impact, we are only looking at a small part of what is our contribution to the carbon footprint of the built environment. We are not looking, when looking at our impact, at that contribution to energy efficiency, that contribution to low carbon design of the building. And second main challenge is to make sure that in the way we are being perceived, and as such we can our perception is being seen as contributive to the decarbonization of the built environment, not to make wrong assessment. Typically, I often give the example of glass. Glass, you can sell single glazing or you can sell double glazing. Double glazing has twice an impact at production than single glazing. But obviously, the strategy of Saint-Gobain is not to develop single glazing to reduce its impact. It's to develop double glazing to reduce the impact of the built environment while reducing also the impact of the production of glass. And that challenge is not yet well addressed and is part of the work that is ongoing within WBCSD to be able to provide some elements of understanding to overcome that challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And thanks to all of you for your comments. We're going to have the opportunity to continue the conversation a bit later on this morning, but just to reflect on some of the key points that you raised. I mean, it's exciting to hear that BMP are really developing ways of creating new finance products Skanska likewise, to actually, drive the change in the industry. But all of you are very clear that the sort of key things that really matter are data, KPIs, ability to work together and break down the barriers along that value chain. The one thing I note that none of you mentioned, which I see as one of the biggest obstacles in all of this, is the disconnects in that value chain, which come from procurement, both procurement of design teams with different people from different companies, but then also, making sure that the aspirations that go into the original financing deal are actually followed through, right the way through to the end of the value chain into construction. And that for people like Emmanuel, that we actually create the market for them to put new and different innovative products into this industry. I'm now going to hand over to Luca from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who's going to tell you a little bit about what they're doing with their partners to move this agenda forwards. Luca, over to you.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks for the speaker earlier. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Yeah, I guess we've heard the challenges, and reminding that after we will continue the discussion with more opportunities. But yeah, so what I will share with you is what we have been doing now with the companies, with the members of WBCSD in addressing the challenges mentioned. But first, I want to maybe put the context of what is actually the challenge of the built environment, the numbers that Roland mentioned earlier. And as we see is that we have a 40% of global emission, energy-related global emission, which are directly and indirectly related to the built environment, being that a large majority currently due to the energy consumption during the operation of buildings, through the indirect electricity consumption, which is 50% of the share. So the production of electricity is a large consumer, large emitter of CO2, but then also the direct energy emission during the heating in buildings. But yeah, we see as well this 30% of embodied carbon, the emission in the embodied carbon. This share will evolve as well, since we might expect an increase in energy efficiency in the buildings and a decarbonization of the grid as well. So that share of 30% will evolve over time. So that's the importance of keeping an eye not only on the operation of emission, but also on the embodied carbon. And one thing that the Global Alliance for Building and Construction is also highlighting in their global status report is to remind about the fact that there is a large increase of surface constantly happening, so which outpace some gaining in efficiency. And interesting is the fact that, for example, the surface of Paris is built every 5 days. The goal that we want to achieve is to achieve a net zero emission across the built environment across its whole life cycle by 2050. So that means to reach zero emission of all these 40% goes to zero. And that goes into both the operation side, really reducing the operation. So all new building should not have net emissions in the operation, and all building as well by 2050. And embodied carbon as well, we need to get at least a 40% reduction in embodied carbon by 2030 to reach then net zero by 2050. And this is kind of the minimum requirement we should get to. Next. Then this, as part of WBCSD project of transforming the built environment, we are looking on how we develop pathways towards a fully decarbonized and circular built environment. And then as part of this, we focus on the decarbonization workstream. And as you see there, we have a large distribution of companies which are directly engaged into this work stream, where we enable and discuss on what are elements that have to be addressed, as we mentioned before, what solution can we provide to tackle that. And we mainly focus on 3 aspects, which we found that is essential to achieve the net zero built environment. On one side, the common language, the common vision across the whole system. And this is mentioned before. We need to have a common language that enable this dialogue between the different parties. Then, of course, we need to achieve the decarbonization. It's not, one thing is to understand the challenge, but then we need to enable as well the transformation. We need to enable the company across the whole system to decarbonize. And eventually as well, what we need is not only the company themselves to change and to decarbonize, but we need to make sure that we have a system around that accelerates this transformation, being that from policy, regulation, conducive regulation, or financial measures which enable and accelerate the action from the company to decarbonize. We do this work with these members. We do this work with other companies on the value chain. And also we do this work together with a lot of partners which we engage to ensure that the common language is not only through the companies, but actually through also the organizations that are aiming to achieve this decarbonization. So this is in a nutshell what is the project. And then here is maybe just a brief reminder of what is the building system. I mean, what we are speaking about and where the actors are located. Because as we see, the structure is obviously many times different interpretation, but this is, we kind of find it that this is a way to highlight where and who is in this value chain. And we can see that we have on one side the value chain of the building, of company in the building, in the value chain, where we have the manufacturing, the material provider, the construction where building gets assembled, practically simplifying it, the owners and occupiers, and the construction. So this is kind of the building as physical asset. But then we have also the influencer value chain, which are not directly responsible for the physical construction of the building, but play a key role to make sure that building get built in the first place. So we obviously have the investor, the financial flow coming to provide investment opportunity for property developer, which then mandate architect engineer to design the buildings. So these are crucial, same important as the stakeholder of the building value chain. But then we see that the emission is actually happening in the building value chain, and the manufacturing and the occupants is where we see at the moment the main emission. So although we can address these two hotspots, we cannot address it without taking all the system into consideration and collaborating across all stakeholders. Yeah. So what we have proposed, or what we are presenting, is the building system carbon framework. This framework enabled for a common metrics and language to be used across the whole life cycle of building, because we can see on one side, we have on the horizontal, the different building stages of the building material, the construction, the use, and the end of life of buildings, where we can see where carbon emissions are released during the different stages of the building. And on the other side, we can also, on the vertical side, we can look on where, what level, what aspect of the building these emissions get allocated to. And this is, for example, the structure, the foundation, which are the kind of the unmovable parts of buildings. And we have the skin, which is kind of the part that are forming the final building, but then through the life cycle, they might be also replaced. The interior elements, and then the equipment, which are eventually the one that are responsible of the electricity or energy consumption during the operation. So in this way, we can see where emissions are happening, who is responsible, who can influence what, but also to keep in mind that what counts, what we need to achieve is the net zero, the zero, or as well, initially to a low number as possible, and eventually a zero number in the overall carbon emission of the building, so the final life cycle emission. So this is the opportunity of the building system carbon framework, and this can be, so what this can be used at building level. So we can see this as an individual building, but importantly as well, we can see this of where and which company is responsible of which emission in the life cycle, and as across the whole system. So multiple building, districts, cities as well, can be agglomerated and find this as a total number, which we can reach, we need to get to zero. So the next one is then, yeah, so the building system carbon framework, the publication, the draft is available today, but we will launch the final publication in the week. So we will so you can look at it, the draft in the website, on our website, and the final publication, you will for sure be advised or be informed about the final publication soon. But yeah, the opportunity is really to have a simple and transparent way for companies of the value chain to communicate, enable this to focus attention on net zero, the built environment across this entire life cycle, and enable different decisions to be taken place enable collaboration, enable regulation, and really enable this performance-based and technology-neutral decarbonization of the built environment. As part of this project, then we will use this framework as a base for future work, being development of case studies, concrete case study of what does it mean, net zero buildings, what development of a science-based target guidance for the building and construction sector system, of where, how science-based target can accelerate, can help this transformation and accelerate the net zero built environment. So with that, I conclude this part here, but then I hand over now for a quick overview on a perspective of the system decarbonization to Alberto, which Director of Science-Based Target, on providing an overview of what are the role of individual companies in decarbonizing, but how this can be fit into a system decarbonization. Alberto, briefly to you, and then we can have we will have the second part of the panel.
Thanks, Luca, and thanks everyone. Good morning. Very happy to share some thoughts. I think you know, we've been working on this issue in the past few months, particularly very actively, and thinking about, you know, the role of individual actors and the role of system transformation to reach net zero emissions. And I think it's a formidable challenge if you think about it, because to reach net zero emissions at the global level basically means that we need to eliminate virtually all the sources of emissions within our economy. And those sources of emissions that cannot be eliminated, then they need to be neutralized with an appropriate amount of negative emissions, right? We need, that's what our atmosphere requires to avoid, you know, continuing to accumulate greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and to stop global warming. And so to reach zero or net zero basically means that that all sorts of emissions need to be eliminated or neutralized, right? Now, I think this requires two dimensions and two ways of thinking. The first one is what Roland mentioned at the beginning, which is the responsibility dimension. And in this, you know, if we want to reach zero or net zero, basically we need each actor to take responsibility over their own emissions and the emissions associated with their business model, right? And we need for each actor on different parts of the economy to take action to reduce and eventually eliminate sources of emissions associated with their own activity. And you know, if some actors take action and others don't take action, then we won't reach net zero emissions at the global level, right? And so that requires then to think also about the second dimension of action, which is something that I would like to call the stewardship dimension, right? Which means that we are not only responsible for our own emissions, we're also part of a bigger system. And you know, in the SBTI theory of change, we acknowledge that emissions, and particularly corporate emissions, don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a system. And in this system, you know, we have a very complex web of incentives and disincentives that basically enable the current emissions, but that can also incentivize the transition towards a zero or a net zero carbon economy. And you know, we need companies, and particularly I would say we need leading companies to not only be responsible for their own emissions, but also to act as stewards for the climate, and to think about ways in which they can also help transform the system in a way that allows us to reach net zero emissions at the global level, right? Which is the goal. The goal is to reach net zero emissions at the global level. And so there's different ways in which companies can do that. I think, of course, the first action is to start taking action to reduce their own emissions. But then there's many other ways in which they can help and influence, including, for instance, through their positive policy advocacy and responsible policy engagement, through solutions and technology that they can bring to the market to help reduce emissions in other parts of the economy, through finance. There's a lot of companies that are financing climate protection activities in other parts of the economy. And, you know, we have a big emissions gap, and we also have a big finance gap, and we need to close both. And both are key pillars of the Paris Agreement. Yeah, to basically creating all these different modes of collaboration that help us get there. We need both. We need responsibility and we need stewardship. I think responsibility, in my view, is the minimum that is expected from every actor that basically wants to act responsibly on climate change. But that is not sufficient, right? If we want to get there, and if we want to get there in the next 3 decades, we need leadership, and for that we need companies to think of a system transformation. And yeah, we very much appreciate all the work that WBCSD is doing to help instigate this type of thinking and to help connect different parts of the value chain to help us get there, because that's what we need.
Excellent.
So
thank you very much. Thanks for this context from your side. I hand over now to Joe to have the second part of the panel, where we, with the same speaker as before, we will look at what opportunity we can have on the built environment. Joe, back to you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to echo Alberto's phrase that it's a formidable challenge that we're facing, and one that really does require systems change. I think the contribution that World Business Council for Sustainable Development have made in creating their framework is that it's actually given us a common language. The diagram that Luca shared enables each of us to see where we sit in the value chain and to think about the relationships that we have with other people. And perhaps that's the first step forwards in terms of things that we could practically do to move this forwards. But I want to return to our panelists, and this time, rather than talking about the challenges, let's be forward thinking. What do you see as the opportunities in creating this transformational change that is needed? And if you have particular ideas about tangible and practical things that would really move this agenda forwards, please do share them. And I'm going to start this time with Emmanuel. to and go the other way through the value chain. So Emmanuel, over to you.
Thank you, Jo. First, what I can say is that I think that the framework that has been developed by WCSD will really help to align a value chain that is a very fragmented value chain as it has been presented. We have that chance that life cycle analysis, especially for building materials, it's not a new topic. I mean, it makes 25 years that it started. It's quite well standardized. It's broadly used already, even if it can be much more used than today. It's more and more included in a number of labels and regulations. So we are not starting from zero, but we are finding the way to make that those life cycle analyses, which are being made on a sound scientific basis, helps to align a value chain. Life cycle analysis is good, but it's complex. And a lot of players across the value chain may not have the strength, the expertise to dig into all that information that is being provided. So the challenge, which I see as being an opportunity, is using this framework, how to make a complex information or complex tool understandable across the value chain. So bringing simple information, which is not a simplistic information, but a simple information that is usable. Once that information is being provided, the second challenge and the big opportunity in front of us is to make sure that that information is well shared and used all across the value chain. And here we have a major opportunity at the moment, which is the digitalization of the value chain of building and construction. Digitalization is a way to make sure that that common language is being used and that all the players across the value chain are working on the same basis and on the same language. I think that we are somehow at the edge of a dramatic change that digitalization will provide towards an acceleration of decarbonization of the built environment. And I welcome that work that has been done by the WCSD to support that change.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And I think the point that you make is very well made. The granularity of information that Sebastian is looking for in terms of, or his investors are looking for, is very different to the granularity of information that some of us further down the value chain are looking for. But if we could have one model and just look at it at different layers of granularity, that might be a significant opportunity. Lena, could I ask if you have anything to add to that or other opportunities that you see?
Well, I think, and Joe, you tapped into that, and I ended also with that, on that note, talking about the importance of the clients, actually having the clients tap into it, and of course then actually giving weight to sustainability performance in procurement processes. And our industry have quite a large part of public procurement and public clients. So that is on the opportunity side. Just like we've been talking about this, having a positive advocacy regarding solutions, also having the public procurement starting to weigh in and choose the ones that are actually delivering a sustainable performance is so critical. And due to COVID, we do see that there are recovery packages now at different markets, and foremost in EU has been very clear about that, how their recovery package will be in the same line like the EU New Green Deal and the EU taxonomy. And I think that will spur more corporations and clients to actually do this shift and the transformation, because that is actually what we need from policymakers and public procurement to be part of the transformation going over. if I would also add on something regarding on the opportunity side, and yet again, maybe tapping into innovation as well. We have done a net zero concept or a energy plus building that we had produced in Norway. We call it the Powerhouse, and it's a concept that we did with an architecture firm, an environmental NGO, Zero, and Entra, which is a state-owned real estate firm. And what we have done, and Skanska stands for the construction of this concept, and we have done 4 of these buildings, and what we have learned in this process is so important. So we now know how we can build a net zero energy building with taking into account the emissions from the whole lifespan, including the energy needed for the production of the materials, for the construction of the building, and for its operation at least 60 years. And World Economic Forum did a shout out about this being one of the in the absolute front when it comes to energy plus buildings. But being a part of those kinds of partnerships and innovations for new solutions, and note here we did it together with Entra, also being a state-owned corporation. It is so important that we can team up like this, because for every time we do a new solution like this, we learn tremendously. And we can take that into account once we embark on the next advancement on this journey on transformation to net zero. And I believe the sharing we're doing here on World Business Council for Sustainable Development in other forums, it is really important that we show those leading examples. We share the challenges and the opportunities, but also make sure that we dare throughout the value chain. And not the least, the financial sector and the clients have to be part of the journey, because you have to crack the business case here.
Lena, thank you for those comments. I'm a great believer in demonstrator projects. You know, we learn by doing, but it's often challenging to get the relevant organizations around the table and committed to collaborating. Gladys, could I turn to you? We had a little bit of you froze when we spoke to you last, so I hope the technology is going to work this time. Do you have any reflections on the value of demonstrator projects in providing an opportunity to accelerate decarbonization of the built environment?
Okay, let me not turn on the video so that it sort of hope it's a bit clearer when I do it on the audio. I'm a keen supporter on doing the demonstration project as well. Coming from an engineering background, I think that having pilot projects really helps on setting the ambitions and how we can do things differently to achieve the same the ambitious goal that we have, the zero carbon by 2050. I would also like to add that having a common knowledge, common language is very important from a new work group perspective. We are primarily, a core business is real estate, but we do have our construction arm, and as a K11 is actually an operator of the real estate as well. So having a common knowledge is a counterstone on having a systematic change for the built environment. Surely that's a no-brainer for everyone in the group. So I would really appreciate the work that WBCSD has been doing on the very breaking down the complex system into a most stakeholder can understand what's the impact will be. So I think if we can use that framework to have a demonstration project, maybe on one of the New Worlds project, our K11's project, that will be very a good leading example, especially in Asia, where we have less of demonstration project in a large scale as well. So really keen to see how the framework is going to push and how it's going to develop in the near future.
Thanks very much, Gladys. Could I just turn now to, feel free to jump in if you want, anybody. But I was just going to actually turn to Sebastian at this stage. I was interested in your reflections, Sebastian, in terms of who you feel along the value chain, out of the types of organizations that we've got present on this panel, do you feel you'd need to collaborate with in order to really define and flesh out opportunities to accelerate decarbonisation?
Thanks, Joe. Clearly, so my answer will be quite simple. We need to collaborate with everybody along the value chain, because it should be really a common effort. And when I heard, for instance, Emmanuel speak of LCS, simplification of common language, yes, it's very important, because we need to have all data that is both reliable but simple, because our guys specialized in investment are not specialized in real estate, not necessarily. They are not specialized in life cycle assessment, but they need to get data from these kind of things. So we need reliable and simple data. And we need to work with other actors, such as, for instance, the demonstration project synthesized by Lena was very, very interesting, because we need to make sure that we know the latest development as far as technical progress is concerned. We need to know where to invest, so we need to invest in the most promising projects, and for this we have to keep in touch with technological projects progress. We have to keep in touch with promising demonstration projects. And so for sure, and we need to discuss with the WBCSD developing a common language, because as you said earlier, there's a problem of granularity. We need to, yes, to have very precise on-the-ground data, but in the end, we have to define and implement big aggregated investment vehicles in which we gather a lot of small projects. So we need to define and to understand the common language to make all this work together, in the end to raise awareness and to develop, yes, promising and meaningful projects to accelerate energy innovation, energy efficiency.
Thank you. Lena, could I just come back to you, following on from those comments, and ask, you know, you've been pioneering in terms of doing things like the demonstrator project, but what is the main thing that is posing the biggest obstacle to you now, that potentially by getting together with other people on this call and from different parts of the value chain, you feel could be overcome, that could actually achieve this transformational change to the system that we really need to make?
Well, I think we need to talk about the positive business case when it comes to green buildings. And there is somewhat of a mindset that this is something that is extra costly. And of course it can be, but it depends on the perspective. And just like I have stated here, amongst our own development projects, we always try to achieve the highest level, and we have quite a good revenue from those, or profits from those projects. So we're kind of showing it by ourselves, but we need to have more people believing in that and actually taking the time to be mindful at the beginning in order to have a future-proof building in the end. I think one of the aspects, when we start to look at measurements and KPIs, we can actually prove it. So by stating, for example, I was mentioning our own commercial buildings in development. Past year, we had 37% energy efficient, lower energy efficiency, or energy efficiency compared to the norm at the different markets, coming out from our commercial development business. So when we're talking about the long-term operations of the building, for us to today start to showing that we can actually have a greater energy efficiency far above the norm stated in different markets, shows it is a business case. So I believe that is so important for us to start to talk about the KPIs, the numbers, and connect them to finance. I also saw amongst the questions here in the chat, someone addressed taking into account the well-being and the health and the environmental footprint of the neighborhood. And that's something also when you are actually building a building, not just to think of the building as such, but actually about the environment and the people around the buildings, of course. And also there think of how are there possibilities to commute, for example. around the area that you are building, having a more holistic approach to that. Also acknowledging that green buildings give a positive potential aspect when it comes to health and well-being of the tenants or the one living in the buildings. And there we have different certification systems that are starting to take form or actually advancing. We have the WELL certification, the FitWell certification, that are actually pinpointing the aspect that green buildings also may have better air quality, better sun possibilities to have sun exposure for direct sunlight for people in their working environment, etc. And that is actually having a positive aspect of people's health and well-being, as well as productivity. Yet again, making clients and the ones buying the buildings value and evaluate the sustainable impact. I think that is key.
Lena, thank you very much for that. And of course, the challenge is that we need to shift the language from just business benefit to talking about the sort of wider value proposition, as you mentioned. And thank you to whoever put the question in the chat channel. It's scrolled backwards, so I can't look. I saw that too, saying that we actually need to think, more broadly about this. And someone else has added a question, which I wanted to just put to you panelists, which is actually recognizing that there's going to be trade-offs in this. Within the building system, there will be trade-offs. There will be decisions to do one thing, and that may have a negative impact on another bit of the building. So we might do something to reduce embodied energy in the building, but then that might increase the operational energy. And that was mentioned earlier with the example of single and double glazing. Has any of the panelists got any thoughts or suggestions or ideally examples of how you've encountered these trade-offs in addressing reducing carbon of a particular project or across your portfolio? No one seems particularly enthusiastic to jump in.
Let me share example that New World has encountered. We normally use a life cycle analysis for 15 years or 30 years, depending on the project that we're going to sell or we're going to own. So obviously for us, for project that we own, operational energy efficiency is the key for us as the more important for making decisions, because that's hit our bottom line on operation efficiency and the costs. But if we have for carbon, I've read example saying that we have a carbon price for building material that might be interesting to actually trade off. Is carbon, embodied carbon more important, or for operational energy more important? But at the moment for us, as a building owner and operator, we think that operational energy actually takes priority at this point. So it depends on, I believe it depends on the business operation model and how we're going to value what's more important for the our company.
Thank you, Gladys. I think you've highlighted one of the key challenges, but also one of the opportunities that exists, and that's simply the boundaries between science-based targets and this concept of sort of systems within systems. Luca described the building system, the built environment system, and the different actors involved. But we also have to recognize that where individual businesses and companies' mandates stop, that's perhaps where they draw the line on their Scope 3 emissions. And actually understanding the boundaries and the overlaps between different people in the value chain is perhaps another opportunity that we might explore going forwards. I wanted to ask very specifically, World Business Council for Sustainable Development have done a fantastic job in producing their framework and also in convening us all today. What do you see as their role going forwards? What would you like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development to do? And please, Alberto, if you have something you'd like to pitch in, please do. But I'm going to open that up to the panel.
Well,
Lena.
if no one else jumps on it, I think it's important that we all get a common understanding what are the major drivers and what is of major impact. It is quite complex. The built environment, the value chain is fragmented, and also the life perspective of built environment is, of course, somewhere between 20 years and 100. So it is quite complex, and we need to acknowledge that. And at times I hear people talk about easy solutions, so to speak, when it comes to circular solutions, etc. But actually even simple circular solutions tends to be quite complex to actually achieve. And we need to acknowledge that, otherwise we can't take the steps on this road. Just giving an example, when you're doing large infrastructure project, there is such a great possibility to reuse material. But you need to also have the policymakers saying that it's okay, for example, to crush concrete on site instead of having hundreds of trucks driving it to a landfill somewhere else. But then it needs to be okay to do that concrete crushing on site, and that may be a bit noisy, and there may be, you know, not in my backyard way of thinking there. So it is all those complex trade-offs, but also support from policymakers and local policymakers to actually stand by high ambitions that they may have on a low carbon or achieving a net zero carbon future. We all need to understand what it actually takes and what it actually means. And that was just one simple solution. It sounds simple, but at times I'm devastated to see when we're not able to have that dialogue, and then we have truckloads going away with concrete that we know could be crushed on site and being reused, and then we wouldn't have the emissions from all the trucks.
Thank you, Lena. Sebastian.
Yes, if I may add something. So yes, WBCSD is doing a very good job in creating a new framework, a common language, which is very important. And as Lena just said, I think it's important to discuss on drivers as well, and to gather best practices. So we know that accelerating energy efficiency in buildings is quite difficult. And so it's important to understand why some actors are willing to do so, to start works, to implement new practices and these kind of things to increase the energy efficiency, and some others don't. So what is the driver between a direction in favor of energy efficiency and another decision not in favor of energy efficiency? Why do such actors take such decisions? And how can we encourage all the actors into implementing the best practices? So yes, gathering best practices and reflecting on drivers should be very useful.
May I also just add, when you're saying that, Sebastian, regarding the energy efficiency, I mentioned the powerhouse concept. So a house that actually produces more energy than it's using. That actually means when the house is up and running, it actually produces the double as it uses in its operations, and thus can share to buildings around it, as well as actually to charge buses or other electrical vehicles with energy. What if all buildings would be energy plus houses or power houses, being able to power up the neighborhood around it? That's a new concept for actually how we produce and how we share energy in an urban environment. That would solve also a lot of the problems we have with resiliency, as well as for problems with the energy systems, where many of them are being challenged today. So for us to start to think of the positive aspects, what a building actually can do. It can do so much more, it can mean so much more for health, for energy production, than what we actually think of buildings today.
Thank you, Lena, for that comment. And I'm afraid we're just about out of time. So I just wanted to reflect on some of the issues that had been raised. There seems to be general agreement that actually having a common language and indeed getting together and having the conversation is worth it. We can't solve this, any of us as organizations, on our own. Clearly data is a big issue, reliability of data, consistency of data throughout the process. And one of the things that we haven't had time to talk about today is how digital technology actually enables us to capture data, process data. And someone mentioned the importance of being open and sharing data, which I think is a very key point, because we need to be very open and honest and transparent about the performance of buildings. Finally, I'd like to just really reflect on Lena's last point and one made earlier. My two big takeaways from this conversation is really that the value chain is even longer than I had thought of coming into this conversation. We've ended up talking about policymakers and government and regulators at one end of the value chain that create the environment in which we all do business. And then, of course, right at the other end of the value chain are the people using the building. And we've tended to focus, or the conversation apart from in terms of housing, has tended to focus on new build, rather than actually recognizing that, of course, we can reduce the impact of the built environment through utilization of buildings, which I think is another issue that we might need to consider. And then the final point that I think was very well made is also, can we do this within our industry? We certainly have to start, just as we've started doing this as individual companies, but we need to sort this out within our industry, but also recognize that some of the problems may be too big to solve within the industry. We may need to think about the impact of the built environment we create and how we can create linkages with, say, the urban environments that our projects are in. So I'd just like to end by thanking you all very much for your contributions. I sincerely hope that this is a conversation that is going to continue, and I'd like to hand back to Roland.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and to all the panelists. This is a really excellent discussion, and I apologize for the rush. I understand these things sometimes take a bit longer to really go into the depth, but it is not the end of the discussion. I think it is really a start, and we invite you all to be part of this going forward as well. I'd like to thank also for the good questions. We have not been able to address them all, but we have taken note, and we will be happy to get back to you also on some of these. So great participation. Now, I really would like to have a few minutes for the last part. And I think I'd like to use Alberto's words around the responsibility. So what emissions is a company responsible for? But also this notion of stewardship at the level of systems emission. And I think with P&G, Franz, you're an excellent example of how you're thinking through your work at the level of systems you interact with. So I'd like to hand over to Erwan, and apologies for the time crush. I hope you'll be able to get your points across in a relatively short time. Erwan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Roland and Luca, for giving me this opportunity to share the last panel. So I will cut my presentations to really what I wanted to use for the introduction. So you will have the slide and you can go back to what I was trying to say. But basically, the built environment is probably the most advanced sector when it comes to the full decarbonization. And what Roland and Luca have put together, it's a grand example of the system transformation that is needed to deliver this full decarbonization. So SOS 1.5 has built and has learned from what the built environment has been doing. And of course, we will also feed back to the built environment to try to go much further. So if you go to the slide, maybe to go quickly, because SOS 1.5, as you know, it's there to help our members and company to feel confident with making a commitment to 1.5 or to net zero by 2050. So we are here to help you to find the solutions and to work all together to deliver this, what is needed. So you go to the, maybe you go on and I'll go, yes, go on, because we don't have so much time. Next slide. And basically, as of July, we are going to start these 3 work streams, and one which is helping individual company to understand what they need to do to feel confident with the commitment to net zero by 2050. So I don't go too much in detail here. Then there's one which is building on the work of the built environment, which is mobilizing the full value chain. So how can we bring companies together to try to decarbonize the full value chain? So it's not anymore one single company that is accountable for all the scope 3 emissions, but it's all together that we are trying to address that. So it's really the key word here, it's collaborations, working all together and on scope 1, 2, and 3. And then there's another work stream that we will start, which is not necessarily the focus of today's discussions, but is how can we improve these global standard and metrics, like the greenhouse gas protocols, the SBTi, to make sure that companies that can indeed deliver. So if you go to the next slide, which is the new concept that we launched with SOS 1.5, which we call it Pathfinder. So Pathfinder, again, I think the built environment has started to do that already before we had SOS 1.5. It's really to put all these companies together that are linked to a very specific activity or specific product or specific value for the societies. And it's to come together to find all the innovations, all the solutions that could be implemented to deliver net zero. So the solution can be technical, can be financial, can be business models, can be also working with policy enablers. So with that, I'm just to the last slide, which are the key message for SOS. It's, and that was said many times by other speakers, is that the business, of course, has a responsibility to engage and to lead these decarbonizations. All companies must align with this objective, but it's clear that no company can reach net zero alone. So we need to work all together. So with that, I will start, it's my pleasure to introduce the 2 speakers. We have Alberto, of course, from SBTi and CDP. Alberto is leading indeed all the work of science-based targets. And then we have also Franz Besnik from P&G, ex-colleague of mine, actually. I used to work for P&G many years ago. And Franz is the director of the Global Head and Sustainability. And we would like to learn indeed from both of them what they think needs to be put in place in terms of working with this full value chain. So I will start with a question to Franz in trying to, can you tell us for you, what does it take for a company like P&G to work with all your customers and suppliers to address this full value chain decarbonization?
Hopefully you can hear me. Thanks, everyone. I'm glad to be here with PS or ex-PS. Well, I would start by just saying, you know, people may wonder why I'm even here on this panel. You know, we're a company that sells soaps, hand washing soaps, very important, and laundry detergents. Why are we talking about buildings? Well, the first thing to say is we actually share the most important thing together, which is the human beings that live in those buildings and produce footprint. And actually, I understand that it's the biggest part of the footprint of the building. Probably about 70% is in the so-called in-use. Well, we have exactly the same number. 70% of our footprint, P&G footprint, is in use phase, in homes of consumers, in buildings, in the form of showers, laundry, kitchen tap, washing dishes, all about hot water for the most. And so that ties us up at the hip. In fact, it's about probably a net 15 to 20% of greenhouse gas emission that we share together. Literally, the energy for heating water for those people, for those users. So to your question, everyone, you know, P&G will not construct homes, but P&G touches every single stream of water in the home, every single stream of hot water, whether it's shampoos in hot showers, or whether it's you know, shaving creams in the faucet, or whether it's dish products in the kitchen tap. And what we are doing is we are aiming to reinvent residential water consumption in the home, especially hot water, so that we can solve for both problems. One, water scarcity in cities, and 2, decarbonization of water heating. Because only when you're able to cut down from today 500 liter up to 500 liter of usage of water per day per person, down to our ambition to 50 liter, then you can rely on energy systems that can be totally decarbonized. If we still remain on this huge amount of water today, we will not be able to do that. It's not easily. It's going to still rely on bulky systems for water heating. So that's the 50-liter home projects that we're spearheading. And exactly to the theme of the day, this is, especially SOS 1.5, this is not something we can do alone. As I said, we're not constructing homes. And most importantly, we need really partners over the entire value chain of the water and the energy to heat the water, to being able to actually create those homes, make those homes 50-liter homes where 50 liter per day per person becomes not only a standard of living, but the aspiration. We want that to be irresistible. We want 50 liter to feel like 500 liter. And that dream is a dream of partners over a coalition that we're forming right now across the value chain, as I said. So we've got companies like Suez, NG, Arcadis that are engaged for outside infrastructure, and we've got Kohler and Electrolux and Insight. And of course, the reason I'm here is because we need partners, other partners, and the building industry has got to be a big partner too. Last but not least, we have WBCSD helping there in running this. It's part of the Build Environment projects. We've got the World Economic Forum and the Water Resource Group 2030. But again, we need more partners in this.
So thank you very much, Franz. Very interesting and indeed very exciting to see the work that you are doing. Due to the time constraint, because we have only 4 minutes to go, I will go directly to Alberto, and maybe I come back to you if we have still a bit of time. So Alberto, on your side, working on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, working on the SBTI, how do you think you could, as an organization, but also with your standard, enhance this collaboration between companies? Or can this standard can help the full supply chain indeed to deliver toward net zero?
Thanks, Evan. Well, I think, first of all, working closely with organizations like yourselves and, trying to address the different value chains. The reality is that what we heard today for the built environment is exactly the same situation for every other value chain, right? We had, for instance, discussion last week about business travel related emissions. And it's a very, very difficult challenge for any company to address individually, right? We need to find a way to bring together airlines, engine manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, policymakers, and companies that are intensive business travel users. And so I think the same logic that is happening here, we need it for every other value chain of the economy. And this is the only way in which we will be able to address this. So I would say, well, we need to keep robust accounting and target setting standards. We also need to think about how to bring these to life with, bringing together different parts of the value chain. So I think this is a good example of what needs to be done.
But Alberto, on that aspect, indeed, we need robust and credible reporting standard, but you also know that many companies are struggling also with the reporting. I mean, the difficulty to get the data, to get primary data. How do you think that this could be improved to make it more easy for companies to deliver accurate and robust greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, I would say, of course, also not with an SBTI perspective, but with a CDP perspective, we think that, the more companies are transparent in terms of sharing and disclosing their own data, the more these data as a public good actually benefits the whole system, right? And right now we know that we have a lot of data gaps in certain parts of the economy. And I think we still need to invest in building capacity in, sectors and regions where even the first step in terms of emissions impact and disclosure is not addressed. We still need to invest in that. And then, addressing the data gap will help us, all of us to have better understanding about where emissions are happening.
Thank you. Roland, it's 29. Do you want to conclude, or can I have time for another question to Franz?
Very fast one, 30 seconds.
So, yeah, Franz, I just wanted to come back on how you mobilize your value chain. So we understand exactly how you want to play, and this is indeed big. Now, how do you mobilize all your value chain to make sure that they deliver against these visions?
Yeah, we are definitely in formation, but right now with the partners, we're at the stage of defining the deliverables. we've identified 4 key deliverables. One is around education, educating consumers on water consumption in the homes, innovation, regulation and policies, and implementation, literally pilots. These are the articulations, that mobilize the other partners, because it's very concrete. It's about, what do we need to out-innovate for? What are the regulations and policies that are in the way? And what pilots do we want to do? Literally, where, in which cities, and by when? And our horizon, first time horizon for the first pilot is 18 months. That actually creates a very tangible deliverables that create the mobilization. And clearly, as we are in the process of fine-tuning our key milestones, timeline, we will see where the gaps are and where we need to shift gears even further and move to the action.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. And Roland, back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Franz and Alberto. And I would just like to repeat, thank you to all the participants. Thank you for joining us and for sending your questions. You were a very lively public, at least on the chat. We'll obviously redo this for those who really are interested. We're having another discussion this afternoon with other speakers as well. So please do join us. And this will be made available as a recording with the key highlights and also the slides. We will make all that available. And we're not done with the virtual event series. We also warmly invite you to our future ones. On Wednesday, we have transformative city business partnerships on the agenda. And next week, we'll look into systems transformation as part of our Vision 2050 agenda. So again, thank you very much for those deep insights. We will work on these going forward in the built environment project in SOS 1.5, and it would be great to have many of you work with us on these challenges. Thank you and have a very nice day.